Cupping is regarded the gold standard of analyzing coffee's flavor. So basically what you do when you cup a coffee is to take a sample of each individual coffee and basically brew it and steep it and then analyze the actual flavor of each coffee. You can analyze a coffee based on its variety, its process, and its defects or positive attributes. So in this instance, we've taken 12 grams of each individual coffee from different regions and different varieties. We will then grind the coffee, steep the coffee, and brew it. Then afterwards analyze the individual flavors and what makes the coffee a positive coffee or maybe a negative coffee, and how to differentiate different regions and varieties based on what you're tasting. Generally in coffee you use what is referred to as a flavor wheel. It's a standard industry taste setup that you can actually break down individual flavors of the actual coffee based on sweetness, acidity, and then subcategorize the actual coffee based on small nuances such as fruity coffee or acidic coffee, or in some instances sometimes a negative coffee. So in our setup we'll just basically go ahead and start grinding the coffee, and then we'll steep the coffee as we go along. It basically involved having to grind each individual sample, and we will then steep the coffee and do each one as it goes along. So whilst we actually grind the coffee, what we're looking for is to smell the aromatics of each individual coffee and pick up any individual nuances that we can pick up whilst we smell. You're looking for sweet aromas, positive, flavorful aromatics, nothing too negative. Negatives in coffee could be regarded as leathery, musty, fermenty. What we're generally looking for is always a floral, a fruity, positive smelling grounded coffee. You can see the coffee when you grind it is actually quite coarsely ground to allow for the steeping of the coffee. In the cupping protocols, we basically steep the coffee for anything up to 4 minutes, allowing each coffee to extract evenly and with enough time to be able to taste the coffee. So as the water is heating up, it allows us the opportunity to individually go through each coffee, pick up the smells and the aromas that come through the freshly grounded coffee. You generally want to do this as close to the brewing time as possible, not grind and then let it sit for a long time, as it will lose its properties. So the temperature of the water is also quite critical. You don't want to boil the water. You also don't want the water to be too cool. So generally we just boil the water just before the boiling point to allow enough extraction whilst we actually brew the coffee. If you're doing this just casually at home, you don't necessarily have to always weigh how much coffee to water ratio, but generally that does help you standardize the process so that if you're doing it repeatedly, you're always getting the same protocols. So now we have our boiled water. We then pass it onto a kettle to be able to allow a little bit more even distribution of water. In this case, we'll weigh each individual cup just to standardize exactly how much liquid we're pouring into the actual coffee grounds. So we're making sure that we're actually immersing all the coffee grounds. And this helps us to actually get an even extraction. Simultaneously, we'll also start our timer to get that 4-minute mark of extracting the actual coffee. So always circulate as I pour the water to be able to evenly extract the grounds. You don't want basically some grounds to be dry. What that actually occurs is you'll have under-extracted coffee grounds. You want even extraction in order to offer even flavors. So as you go through each individual one, the coffees will start extracting their different flavors, aromas as well. So we've analyzed the coffee aroma firstly from a dried coffee. Now we're actually going to analyze it also from a wet aroma. Coffee has the great ability to be able to transform in different elements, not only in the actual dry form, but also in the wet form, giving you different flavors and aromas in the two different parts. Now we're just basically going to wait the total 4 minutes and see exactly how the coffees will start developing. So in this stage, as we wait for the 4 minutes, you will actually have the opportunity to then go through each individual cup and start smelling the wet grounds. You want to put yourself very close to the actual cup itself without moving each individual cup and just smelling the actual coffees itself. Actually, when you analyze a coffee, we think that we actually taste coffee through our palates, but actually your sensories are mostly linked to your nasal system. So you can actually pick up a lot more of the positives and negatives of the coffee through just smelling a coffee. That's your primary sensory connection with the actual coffee that you will be tasting. So it's important to always smell and attune your senses to that. Automatically going through the individual cups, we start picking up each individual flavors and aromas, which will hopefully translate in the actual palate itself when you actually start tasting the coffee. So this is regarded as the crust. It's been formed on the top of the actual cup itself. As we're getting closer to the actual time to break the crust, we're going to go and actually release some of the aromas as well as we put the actual spoon through the actual coffee grounds. That allows also the aromatics of the wet grounds to give you a good sensory analysis of what you hopefully will be able to taste once this procedure is over. So it's a 3-stage part. It's your grinding, dry grounds, your wet immersion now, and then we'll do the final one, which will be the tasting. So now that we're ready to actually continue with the actual breaking of the crust, we'll put ourselves very close to the actual cup itself and make sure that the spoon goes all the way down to the bottom of the cup, activating, churning the grounds that have settled now at the bottom of the cup. We're smelling for any negatives again in the coffee or any positives that you might pick up. Some coffees will have more of a warming aroma. Some might have even sort of positive aromatic floral attributes. Generally with coffees from Africa, you'll have a lot of those more floral, fruity characteristics. Coffees from Central America also have that, and South America, but to generalize, you will find that coffees from certain areas have certain attributes just because of their geographical location and also their processing. So now what we have to do is we can't taste the coffee right away. We just literally have to clean up each individual cup to get rid of this sludge that sits on the top and prepare the cups for tasting. Removing this top part will actually allow you to get a clean taste profile as you taste the coffee. And you do this meticulously. So once we do this, we will wait another 4 minutes until the cup cools. Temperature is quite critical in the sense that your palate does not want very high temperatures. It'll almost shut down the taste receptors and not allow you to actually welcome the flavors of the coffee. It'll burn your palate. So in order to give a good opportunity for you to taste and analyze the coffee correctly, you let the coffee cool down to a warm state, and then also you taste the coffee at room temperature, so almost in a cold state, and that's when the coffees will start exhibiting a lot of their positive and exotic attributes. You'll find the coffees will be a lot better in mouthfeel. You'll have a much better sweetness also develop, And so it's important to taste the coffees in those different stages. Generally, when a coffee is either badly roasted or is it a negative coffee, a poor quality coffee, in its cold state, a lot of those attributes will be highlighted. So it's a good professional way to actually analyze if a coffee is actually good for purchase or if a coffee is actually quite defective in nature. Not only defective in the roasting process, but also in its quality when you purchase it in its green form. So cupping becomes quite critical. The better the cupper you are, the better taster you actually are. So now once we allow the coffee to cool down, we'll start tasting the coffee. So the idea is to take a sample from each individual coffee, and what we're going to do is aspirate in and activate our nasal passage, and you do that by slurping the coffee in quite aggressively. You pass it through in your mouth, giving you a lot of sensations: mouthfeel, sweetness, acidity. So in conclusion, after analyzing each individual coffee, there were some that probably had more characteristic than others. If you prefer a more citric coffee, then you could be looking out for maybe a washed coffee, which highlights a little bit of the acidity of the coffee. If you prefer a slightly milder coffee, you can maybe go towards a pulp natural or naturally processed coffee, which has a little bit more muted acidity, and we could pretty much see that in the individual cups as we went through the cupping protocols. So a coffee is defined by its geographical region as well, and here as we tasted, we found that the South Americans had a little bit more of a milder taste profile, particularly from Brazil. The Central Americans exhibited a little bit of acidity, but also had that beautiful warming mouthfeel. And the African coffees were the more flamboyant coffees, the more aromatic, the more floral, the more fruitier coffees, which makes them very special and widely sought after. So there's pretty much a coffee for everybody, but it's just defining exactly which is your particular preference.